All right. Welcome to the ninth episode of Pan African Leadership Center. My name is Gabriel Yegaka. I am a political analyst based in Cameroon, a mathematician and a youth leader. So we are streaming live on United States of Africa, a Pan African Leadership Center channel on Twitter. You can get it on Al Kebolan, and you can also get it via Lincoln page, the United States of Africa. So today we'll be discussing on the pernicious influences of democracy on Africa's emancipation and development. And we are pleased to have as panelists Mr. Saad Jama Hassan from Somaliland, an economist, a Pan-Africanist, and a youth activist. We equally have Eza Chimera Nwazo, leader of the OAF and CEO of ACCP Biogas. Welcome, Mr. Saad. Welcome, Mr. Chimere. Mr. Saad, just a word of
we are welcome. Thanks, Gabriel Yakaka, and we are very blessed to have to be with you today for this beautiful platform, and we are welcome. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chimere, how is Nigeria today? Mr. Chimere. Okay, we assume we have a little fault. So we would like to invite Assad to take our first question. Mr. Assad?
Yeah, welcome. Go ahead.
So we want to know exactly, can you tell us, how does democracy affect the economic emancipation of Africa? We see
Hello,
that
everyone. I'm sorry. It's raining over here, so I can't even hear what you're saying. The rain, the background is so
Um,
noisy. I can't even hear a single word of what you are saying. The rain is
oh, we can.
so noisy. I can't even hear a thing. Just so noisy. I can't even hear even a single word. I can't even hear a single word over here.
So, we're
So do
sorry
you
about
want to
that.
take the first question, Mr. Isa? Would you like to take the first question from Gabriel, or let me take it?
I think he's not really getting us, so we'll just move on. Mr. Assad,
Mhm.
so let us look at some very pertinent problems. We have noticed, some group of political analysts noticed that most of the countries which are monarchical, that's a monarchical form of government, have a greater sense of development, and those who are democratic, especially the the democratic countries, are super underdeveloped. And we are thinking that democracy is part and parcel of the problem. So we are asking, how has democracy affected the economic emancipation of Africa? Remembering the definition of neocolonialism, which says that it is the use of cultural imperialism, economic imperialism,
No.
conditional aid, and globalization to influence other countries instead of using the conventional method. So, what is wrong, Mr. Hassan? As an economist, tell us, what has democracy really caused to us? Why is China so populated yet so developed? In China, we have the president is serving a lifetime mandate, so we don't do alternation there. And you can see the same thing with the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom. So, can you tell us a little bit on the democracy's effect on economic emancipation in Africa?
Well, if I try to answer that question, I think as an economist, that the economy, African economy, must be a free from the control and the intervention of the foreign affairs, foreign interference of foreign states and nations. For example, those countries you have mentioned are the machines that cracks the system to fuel the poverty, the less emancipation of African countries and development to sabotate the African development. So economically, it has an effect. As a matter of fact, when I'm talking about economics, as an economist, as an economic perspective, how Africa can be a development hub in the world. So I think to think about the development of Africa, first we have to think about how we can determine our fame and future within ourselves rather than to believe the foreigners and those who are not Africans to determine our decision making processes, whether we are going to develop or whether we are not going to develop. I prefer that subject international community or abroad countries, including Europeans and maybe some other African countries, are going to subjugate other African countries to be a dividend from their living, dividend from their economic activities. For example, the community that comes from United Arab Emirates. Uh, the Emirates consider Africa as the best market to be sold those goods and services, maybe. So I think that the suitable answer will be Africa must liberate, not just the brain crony process, but economically, socially, and politically. And, and in my point of view is that Africa must be free from those problematic issues, I think.
So, what do you have to say about the? Let us look at the International Monetary Fund. What do you have to say about their magnanimity? Generally we hear the International Monetary Fund has loaned money to this country to be able to support them. Recently, in Guinea Conakry, China loaned about 20 billion francs. Uh, as a means for them to be able to extract the bauxite, which is one of their principal natural resources. So we want to ask on the conditional aid, especially with uh, let's look at the International Monetary Fund's loan. So how does it affect our economy? What and how can we do without? What must be done to be able to come out of such shackles?
International Monetary Fund, as they mention and consider themselves, is that they control the money and the flow of money around the world. So, but the African countries have not any high level degree of influence to control themselves more than IMF. IMF is a just a monetary control of money, not just in Africa but in the world as they consider themselves. But I think that the international monetary fund have not any benefit from us. Africa is the richest country, is the richest continent in the world, and the poorest. That's what they wonder, what they always wonder, to understand what is the problem if we are the richest continent in the world, why our people are poor, why our institutions are poor, and principles and the steps that we have to take to to write to write back our solution. So international monetary fund have no any influence, any benefit. I mean, for African development. So we have to develop ourselves rather than to expect anyone else. Africans must have the faith to develop their selfies with their determination and confidence between the African people.
All right. So you see, there has been a recent coup d'état in Guinea-Conakry, where Alpha Conde was overthrown by Colonel Mamadou Doumbouya, and we upon the
Gabriel,
it
raise
was
up your
he made
voice.
it public.
I don't, Professor, raise up your voice. I don't hear you well. Let's try to raise up your voice. Excuse me.
Can you get me?
Yeah, I'm getting you now. I can hear you well now.
Yes, I was saying that there was a recent coup d'état in Guinea-Conakry, and this was I mean, we saw people jubilating because in the African minds and the African mindset generally, they consider long-term mandate as anti-democratic. So when you stay for long in power, it is considered to be anti-democratic. Meanwhile, we have noticed that most countries develop themselves not with democracy because it is the democracy has not been well understood by Africans, or it must be customized for it to be serviceable to the African community. So I'm asking it relative to regime change. Is clinging to power anti-democratic? Or can Africa still define democracy in her own sense in such a way that it fosters development?
Well, first we need, as an African people, first we need to understand as a whole what kind of democracy works in Africa. Is it a democracy that the African people make themselves to rule themselves and to to regulate their rules and principles as an African people, or is it a democracy that comes from other community in the world, or maybe Europeans or maybe Africans, wherever it sits? But first, we have to understand what kind of democracy that we want to make and to realize one Africa, aside from the Pan Africanism with a multidimensional way. I think so. I myself, I have no idea what kind of democracy works in Africa. Some countries, and that's very difficult for me. Not for me, but just many people around me, or many people like me, are wondering what kind of democracy Africa wants to be. How Africa can be a democratic continent, and and a democratic advocate, and I believe that the democracy is a rule of people, by people, for people. So, for instance, there are many countries in Africa. Each country has its own effect towards democracy. For example, you're from Cameroon and I'm from Somaliland. There are two types of democracy, Cameroon and Somaliland, if I compare. but that's why we don't have any much more understanding to analyze the the kind of democracy that's existing Africa right away.
So, Mr. Assad, thanks for your contribution. So, how do you think? What are those things as a what are those problems that you found as an economist that must be arranged, or can I say must be repaired to be able to foster Africa's development? What are those main things on the African economy? Maybe link it to their currency and to the influence of international bodies in the African countries. Recently, we noticed that Africa is so rich, filled with minerals. We have a lot of bauxite in Guinea Conakry. We have Cameroon, which has a little bit of everything. We have other countries like Chad, Gabon, and so these countries are so rich but yet so poor. So what is wrong with our economy? Or what exactly has our economy lost that has made the white man to be able to override over Africa?
That's a good question, and I think that the African people don't believe themselves, don't believe themselves, don't believe that they can be a machine of their economy, the machine of their social development, and the machine of creating beautiful and prosperous Africa. So uh, we are psychologically the most of African people believe that the Europeans and Americans can make everything for us. That's where they wonder whenever I think about the development of Africa. Africa is the richest. Cameroon is a rich country. Somaliland is another rich country, but we don't have enough social services. We don't have some areas, some countries, or some districts of Africa. You see, there's no clean water, there's no health services, there is no educational services. You can see the gap of development and how the people of Africa are thinking about. They think about that the international agencies come Africa and create a better life, creating to get a clean water. You see, creating a good education. You see, creating a good infrastructure. So the African people fundamentally don't believe that they can develop themselves without the interference or without the hand of the international community. That's a problem, I think, as far as I know.
Or you're from Somaliland, and we talk about the West African countries and their new currency, the ECOWAS or the CFA, and we have the from reports from economists that France, for example, uh, g- gets is a treasury of the monies that comes from all this country. So what is so different about? I mean, what are those difficulties to be able to get your own currency as an African country? And what are the advantages of it? What are the disadvantages of it? And why should African countries, especially the African countries of the West, leave the CFA?
Replay, replay the question.
Yes, I was talking about currencies. As an economist,
Currency.
we want to find out about the currencies, yes, used by African countries, and we want to find out uh, why is it so difficult for African countries to live from currencies like the CFA, especially for African countries of the West, when we know that it is not taking us any step forward, but rather chopping, I mean, getting into our system and benefiting from it. So, what are those things? I mean, can you give us a little bit of insight on currencies and why should African countries pick up their currencies, create their new currencies, or for those who are still
So,
depending on
so you are
currencies
talking
that we
about
cannot?
so you are talking about the devaluation of the African money. I think the
Yes,
devaluation,
that's what I'm talking
the
about.
devaluation.
Yes.
Okay, the devaluation. There are many types of inflation, as you know, and most of the African countries are economically not a good countries economically when I think about an economic aspect. So the 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 the, the the less value of African currencies. Is that because there is no any strong institutions which control
Strong
the,
institution.
the yeah, strong institutions. If there is any strong institutions, there must be an well economic activities, well functioning economic activities. For example, in whole Somalia, I'm talking about right now. I'm Somalian, but I'm from Somalia. In the last 30 years, there have been a chronic civil wars. So you can imagine how the economy of the Somali people works, where there's no any strong institution, where there's no a good economist who can determine the decision making process, how the economy of the country can look like in the maybe in the coming 5 years, in the coming 10 years. So there's no the most problematic issue of African currencies when I'm talking about as an economist is that there's not any sufficient strong institutions. Thanks for asking that question.
Okay. And talking about strong institutions, uh, we have strong institutions and we have strong men. But many attempted to, I mean, many have it that to build strong institutions are built by strong men. Whether they are strong institutions, strong economic institutions, or strong cultural institutions, but they are built by strong men. Why? What has kept the strong men of Africa to be able to build strong institutions,
And the
especially in
other
the
point,
economic domain?
I think that the cause is the habitation and the buffers of Africa, whole Africa. Is that a foreign aid? What we call a foreign aid? I think there's nothing called a foreign aid, but the aid, what they call the foreign aid, is what they have been stealing from our natural resources and then give it back and on us to persuade our our people that they are much respect for the African people and support them. So the foreign aid is a part of the problem, I think.
Okay, so the strong economic institutions of Africa. What are those strong economic institutions of Africa, and how? I mean, and how? And what do you think are the look are their setbacks, and how they must be stepped up to be able to foster development?
So when we think about the institutions, how we can create, I think your question is that how we can make a strong institution, isn't it?
Yes.
We first we have to think about the production. Economically, there are, if I recall, the economics, the fundamental principles of economics is that every country's production, every country's living of standard depends on the level of its production. So you see, the production of the country and the living standard of its citizens are dependent on each other. So the production must come first. We need production, production, production. I say it twice. To produce something, if we
Okay.
produce something, we can make a better economy and prosperous Africa and beautiful
Okay.
country.
If you're just joining us, we are streaming on the United States of Africa page on Facebook and LinkedIn and on Twitter. And we are talking about the pernicious influences of democracy on Africa's emancipation and development. So we would like to string back to the next, to the other most important questions, looking at democracy in a very deep sense of it. Most African countries see democracy as simply a rotation at the level of the regime, and so that's why they link it generally to coup d'etats that have been made in general. But we see that democracy, on the other hand, could be appreciated if African countries can contextualize their own democracy and use it to be able to foster their emancipation. Some political analysis of the East African countries. Oh, thank God, Mr. Ezra, is it okay? You back, Mr. Chimera? Again, can you mute? Can you unmute your mic? Hello,
Isa,
Mr.
open your
Chimere?
microphone.
Unmute your microphone. Your microphone.
Hey, hello everyone. I can hear you now. The rain
We can
is
hear right now.
yes, so I can hear
Okay.
you.
Thank you. You're Ezra Chimere. Sorry for the last name is Nwazo, leader of the OAF. What is and the CEO of ACCP Biogas?
All right. Yeah, I'm the CEO of ACPP Biogas. And ACPP stands
Okay.
for African Continental Power Project.
Okay. And what is the OAF?
Our OAF is One Africa Family. That's the full meaning of OAF, One Africa Family. That's the full
Okay.
meaning.
Okay. So you are an entrepreneur. If you're into entrepreneurship and you're leading and into the field of biogas in Nigeria, so we are having very pertinent questions. We wanted to get some answers from you, and we want to see exactly the economic emancipation of Africa. So, Mr. Ezra, as an entrepreneur, what do you think is keeping the rich African countries underdeveloped despite their rich economic resources? And how do you think that the government system in place is affecting that?
All right. Thank you so much, Gabriel Yagaka. The question you asked, how can improve the economy of Africa, why the African continent is poor despite the wealth of the continent. Yeah, that's a question that a lot of persons have asked. Why is it that we are poor and rich at the same time? We are rich potentially and we are actually poor. That question is a deep question. It has a lot of answers because there's not a single factor that's keeping us poor in Africa. There are many factors that are keeping us poor in Africa, and there are several of them. For example, let's talk about the history of Africa. Yeah, the history of Africa has been a glorious history. We know that we had a history that was stopped or paused by a lot of invasions, like the slave trade, colonization of Africa. Now we talk about new colonialism, and those invasions they caused a lot of poverty in Africa. For example, from the year 1441, when the slave trade began, when the Portuguese came into the West Coast of Africans and made them slaves. Since then, they have been robbing Africa, and that is part of the reason why Africa is poor today. I want to go into too much details. We already know that. If we talk about that, we don't have enough time to talk about that. Then we come into this colonization and colonialism, which we have today. Colonialism is leaving Africa every single day. Talk about Africa being rich. If you're rich, if you have all the resources in the world and you control your resources, then you can't be rich. If you have all the gold in the world, gold, it is as though you don't have anything, and that's what's going on on the continent. We have oil, but we have Shell BP. We have Shell, a British-owned company controlling 500 million barrels of oil in Nigeria. So how can we benefit from oil? Talk about diamonds in Africa. Talk about the beers. Talk about the Anglo-American diamonds. And so, where are the African indigenous owned companies? So that's one of the reasons why the African continent is poor. So if we want to solve the problem of poverty in Africa, we have to emancipate Africa from neocolonialism, economic wise, political wise. Some say that Africa is free politically and that Africa is not free economically. That is confusion because we know that the political structure controls the economic structure. You can't talk about economic freedom without talking about political freedom. You can't have political freedom without having economic freedom. What Africa has is physical independence, and because of that, African people cannot have full control of their resources. So one of the reasons why Africa is poor today is because we are not in full charge of our resources. Then we also talk about conflicts in Africa. There are a lot of conflicts going on across Africa. In Nigeria, Nigeria is now the most conflict-prone country in the entire Africa. Nigeria is the third most terrorized country in the entire world. With the conflict going on in Nigeria, you can't talk about progress. For you to have progress, there must be peace. That is the environment that enable people to work out the economy and make things. One of the reasons why the United States of America is growing every day is of community development is because America has been peace. So that's one of the reasons. But
Miss,
we're having
Mr. Ezra, Mr. Ezra, you mentioned something concerning how political emancipation is intertwined with economic emancipation.
yes, sir.
And on that point, we want to really find out if the democracy that has been given to Africa is not also part and parcel of the reason for Africa's underdevelopment. Let us look at the political system. Is there democracy not in the process? For example, you see,
Oh,
when African countries
good.
have,
That's a
when
good
African,
question. You see,
yes,
democracy in Africa. We're talking about the problem of democracy in Africa, how it affects Africa. Democracy is not a problem. Democracy, which is government of the people by for the people, is not a problem. The problem we have in Africa is that we have what I call undemocratic democracy. We have undemocratic democracy, a democratized democracy. We call it democracy, but if you find that is actually oligarchy, that's what we have. Oligarchy, which is the rule of the few. Persons who are ruling Africa. Yet every year, for every 4 years, so we have the problem of undemocratic democracy. And two, when we talk about the problem of democracy, that's the problem of leadership also. And also, we can talk about the problem of external influence on leadership in Africa. So what we have in Africa is not pure democracy. That's the problem. I can break it down into pieces. If we break it down, it will be a lot of someone with like 40 minutes. Like break it down into pieces. Talk about the indices. When we talk about the indices of good governance, that's what we are lagging behind. And what we have in Africa is not democracy. It is a westernized form of in Africa. We feel that we are having democracy. They keep telling us what we have in Africa is not democracy. If I can proceed further, now election. If you talk about elections, for it to be an election to be an election, it has to be free and fair. But a poll carried out by CNN, that was in the year 2016, found out that over 50% of Africans do not trust elections in Africa. They believe that elections in Africa are not free and fair. And if you ask me, are free and fair. Over 50% of the respondents or the people think that they at one time. Where is democracy? And if you talk about elections in Africa, it's about 10. People will introduce this election. During the election, the election held before they gave an independence, they were one of them to introduce this system. They began to teach us how to. They began to teach Africans how to. And when they left, the system that they put continued, and we began to put so it's a system that is was. Whereas Europe, they want when they came to here to Africa, they introduced rigging of elections, and they introduced all those systems to analyze people to falsify results. They all those things. In Nigeria, they falsified the census. That was year 1953. They falsified the census, and that's how to rig even to rig election. They taught us all these things. So what we have in Africa today is not democracy. What we have today is dictatorship with term limit sometimes, and most times we do not even have term limits. For example, you check from 1967, it was foreign. I thought, and who put him there? The French, the same French people that bring to 1967 to the year 2005. So where's democracy? Where's democracy?
Okay.
Since the year
Okay, Mr. Ezer. Mr. Sak,
Mm-hmm.
yes, you did mention about strong men and strong institutions. If the United States is great today, it's generally because after building their country using monarchy, the United States now brought in democracy. So democracy is a sort of a maintenance engine, not an engine of development. And so you discover that due to strong institutions, once the strong institutions are set up, strong men now, whosoever comes up to leadership can govern, because the strong institution stands with time. In fact, what is the question? The question is, do we really need the kind of democracy that causes alternation at the level of power? Or we need the kind of democracy that is focusing on the African development? Because one is tempted to think that the term limit that has been given to African countries is what was no Africans are not used to. Africans are used to how do they call it, chiefdoms, kingdoms. That was what Africa knew before until the white men came for colonization. And now it has become a problem because some presidents after barely know or manage their countries or understand their countries better at the end of their second mandate. But that is a time too that they have to leave for a new person to come. So this constant regime power change, does it not affect the economy? Do we really need a democracy that constantly causes regime power change, or do we need a democracy that focuses on manufacturing our products and selling it to the international community? Mr. Sir, we can't get you your mic.
Okay, are you hearing me well now?
Okay.
That's really a good question. As I mentioned earlier, the kind of democracy we need as an African people is the democracy that maintains and protects, can make a protection of African emancipation, social emancipation, economic emancipation, political emancipation, and development also. So the democracy we need is that the democracy that can create inclusive community to think about the future perspective, how the Africa looks like in the coming 10 years, coming 20 years, coming 10 years. So the democracy we need is that a democracy that can make Africa great again. That's my answer and what I may think about. And thanks for your asking the question. And I think the African people must understand the suitable, what kind of democracy is suitable for African people, and how democracy can apply for African people. That's the question. In my own way, I think Africa can be developed without using a democracy of Americans and the democracy of Europeans. But the democracy we believe now is that the democracy of evidence. We are always evidence uh, from those countries, maybe Europeans or Americans. So I believe we have to create, we have to discover, and we have to make the essential democracy that can protect us, that can make our continent proud, and make our citizens richer and richer than now, and prosperous Africa, I think.
Okay. Mr. Ezra, can you unmute yourself? Okay.
Yes.
So you are the CEO of ACPP Biogas, which means that you're contributing to your economy as a Nigerian. I guess it's Nigeria.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
you're
sir.
contributing to your economy as a Nigerian. And we have this issue of policy making in the African countries, which generally has to pass through democratic channels, which means that if you are enacting a policy, you definitely need to pass it to the parliament and all those voting process. And we also know that democracy was defined by some political figures or great philosophers as the dictatorship of the majority. And one of those philosophers equally said that um, the majority sometimes simply means that all the truth is on one side, which means that what has to foster development in the African countries is not supposed to be open to the point that it always has to be everybody's contribution, because everybody's contribution doesn't have a place in all circumstances. As the leader of the OEF and as CEO of ACCP Baudet, observing the development of monarchical forms of government like the United Arab Emirates, in Africa like Morocco and the United Kingdom, what can you say about development when it comes to a one-man rule instead of a rule that has to come with a lot of voting process that is democratic?
Good. I get your question. Does it mean democracy or monarchy, or
yes,
democracy affects our development? Or now, it all boils down. It all boils down to leadership. It depends in leadership. If or aristocrats who care of who want the development of Africa and are willing to pay the price would work. But you have the of the majority or led by a group of people who are democrats, also care good of the masses of the people that can able to develop. What it all boils down to is what is the agenda? Do they have the positive agenda, or do they have a selfish agenda? If they have a positive agenda, let's say a monarchy, if you have a monarch that has the good intention, for example, someone like Gaddafi, when Gaddafi ruled Libya, he ruled Libya, for example, like sort of a monarch, and he transformed Libya before he began to implement his principles of democracy, which which he penned down in the Green Book, which talked about committees, use of committees to rule the country in a form of direct democracy. But we know that Gaddafi largely ruled as a dictator. And Gaddafi built an economy that was the best in the entire Africa before his demise. Now, you talk about also in the United Kingdom, they have monarchy and they also have a parliament. In UK, they have a form of democracy and a form of monarchy that is known as constitutional monarchy, where the king reigns and the parliament rules. So the Queen of England does not necessarily rule England. She reigns. The Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, reigns. So she has some form of ceremonial powers, whereas the power lies in parliament. Now you go to Morocco, they have absolute monarchy in Morocco. And in Saudi Arabia, there's also absolute monarchy. And Saudi Arabia, we know, is one of the richest countries in the world, utilizing the resources that they have in Saudi Arabia to develop Saudi Arabia. And we know that Saudi Aramco is the most valuable company in the world, together with the Apple Incorporated in US. Both are worth over 2 trillion US dollars. Now, if you come to Africa, do we need to have democracy or to have monarchy? Now, the answer is, can we find a credible leader that has the interest of Africa at heart, that has the wisdom to rule Africa? If we can have that and have a form of constitutional monarchy, then it can work. But to me, the best form of leadership we can have in Africa is democracy. And in that democracy, even if we have a king or a chief, then we'll also have a parliament where the decisions that pertain to Africa will be discussed. And also, we should have a form of parallel direct democracy running together with indirect democracy, because the system of direct democracy was the system we were using in the world before the advent of indirect democracy. So in Africa, we need to have the three at once. If this monarchy, It has to be constitutional monarchy. Then we're talking about democracy. We have to have at least the 8 principles of good governance, the 8 indices of good governance. We must have an inclusive government where the people can input their interests, can input their voices before decisions are made in Africa. We cannot have a system where one person should dictate for all. Even if that person has a good intention, the person cannot be right at all times. We also need the people to make the input in order for that decision to be in a way that it can affect everybody positively. So to me, in Africa, what we need is to work on our democracy so that we will have true democracy. And even if we want to have a form of constitutional monarchy, that monarchy will be such that it will still be constitutional and it will not give absolute power to any single individual. Because once we have that, as the saying goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we need to work on our democracy in Africa. For example, our elections must be freer and fairer. We must have a system that ensures that we have free and fair elections in Africa. And we must make sure that the electorates, the masses, that we educate the masses so that they will know the power of election, that whoever you choose to become your leader for the next 4 years or for the next 8 years is going to affect the country. Because leadership is the singular most important factor in the development of any nation. Once you have good leadership, that nation will become a great nation. We have mediocre leaders, we have bad leaders, the nation is going to suffer for the next 4 years, for the next 8 years. So we must work on those who we allow to become the leaders in Africa. So if we want to have any system, whether it's going to be constitutional monarchy in Africa, we're going to have democracy and that's of presidency, prime ministership, or so on. We're going to make sure that we make it to be as inclusive. We're going to make sure that we have free and fair elections in Africa. We're going to make sure that we have a system of accountability. We cannot have a system where there's no accountability. We must not have a system where a person can rule forever without having any clear agenda. If we want to have a system where people can rule forever, then there must be set targets which person must achieve within those period of time person is going to rule, whether it's 30 years or
Mr. Ezere, that can happen if we have strong institutions. In the other countries, we have seen African, for example, in China. I will go back again to China. The president serves a lifetime mandate. You have a president for life. Yet we have seen China's development. So what can Africa emulate from that? Africa has a large population, rich in mineral resources. Can we not stop? Because this is what I wanted to ask. Okay, democracy is now the new catalyst to excessive politicization at the expense of economic development. We find ourselves in a continuous, process of thinking and talking and pointing out only about regime change. We have little time that we have to ourselves in terms of the development of our economy. Why can we not devote most of our times to discussing about our economic emancipation rather than our political emancipation? I think what is keeping us is in that shackle is democracy, because everybody wants to go to power and we're only interested in that. It takes up all the time. So we are actually identifying the pernicious influences of democracy on Africa's development. One of them is the fact that it maintains us in excessive politicization. Another one is that it is not customized to fit the African setting. As an economic agent, as an entrepreneur, and Mr. Hassan as an economic agent, we are believing, the new African mind leaders and scholars are believing that Africa needs to develop her own kind of democracy. Africa needs to bring up some sort of a republican democracy where we don't have time to do excessive politicization, but rather think about how to forge our economy ahead. Mr. Saad, can you put your mic on? Mr. Saad?
Yeah, hi, yeah.
Yes. So, talking about excessive politicization, what's your contribution on it with respect to economic development, excessive politicization in African countries? when I talk about excessive politicization, I'm talking about um, the time we give to simply regime change. You know, when we talk about, we keep shooting our African country, there's this sense of Afro pessimism, and everything about it is just all around the power. If we are able to set up strong institutions, do we still need democracy, or we can adopt the monarchical form of government in order to foster development in Africa?
So your question is that how these institutions can be well-functioning institutions and can be developed economically.
I can get you. I can get you. Can you hear me?
So to develop this institutions, first we need to understand what kind of institution is it.
Mr. I'm not sure I'm getting you. Can you talk closer to your mic?
Are you hearing me well? Are you
Hello?
hearing me well? Hello.
Yes, I can get you now.
I think your question was how these institutions can be developed politically and economically, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
So first, that's a very good question, and if I try to answer that question, is that economic influences and political influences are always something related on each other. The more politically, the more country, one certain country can be stable politically, can be economically rich or middle income country. So the institutions, the political institutions must come first to establish them first. Political institutions must come first. After, we have to develop the economic institutions and their principles to control their policies and their, I think, their influences must be considered that they are dependent on each other. So the politics are without good governance, there is nothing we can do to make strong institutions. I think.
Okay. That's your contribution. If you're just joining us, you're joining us on the 9th episode of the Pan African Leadership Center. So, sir, can you unmute yourself?
I think you.
Okay. So, if you're joining us, we are on the 9th episode of the Pan African Leadership Center, and we are looking at the pernicious influences of democracy on Africa's emancipation and development. Mr. Eze, as an entrepreneur, how has foreign currencies, how has the effect of the currencies that African countries have, or the non-independence of, or the dependence of African on foreign currencies, or can I say exchange rate, affected your business or the economy in which you live? One is tempted to think that, one is tempted to believe, we have in Cameroon, for example, 1 franc CFA being $1 being equals to about 500 francs CFA. And I think we have an exchange rate like that again between the dollars and
I didn't get
that
you,
of
Gabriel.
the naira. Yes, can you get me? Can you get me, Mr. Chimera? Mr. Chimera, can you unmute yourself? Mr. Chimera, we can't hear you. Mr. Chimera, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Sorry, I didn't get your question. The network went off.
Okay.
Can you just?
So I was, yeah. So I was asking, as an entrepreneur, in Nigeria, generally African currencies are weak. When you talk about an exchange rate between African currency and the foreign currencies, they're so weak. So what
Okay.
exactly is posing the problem? When Africa is rich, is it that there is more of importation than exportation? And how can we do to come out? I mean, how can Africa uh, foster development by, is it true gaining their own currency? Because we are tempted to believe that it does not all, that there is still some sort of shackles that we are being held with, because we know of countries that have their currency, yet the exchange rate between them and the other and the foreign currencies are still, I mean, it's improper. So how does it affect the African economy?
Thank you very much. The effect of currency on businesses in Africa is very pernicious. For example, in Nigeria, a dollar currently is about 579 naira. A dollar is about 579 naira. So it used to be about $150 about 8 years back. So you see that the prices of goods in Nigeria tripled. So it's really affecting businesses in Nigeria badly. And now most of our currencies we have in Africa are also not that strong. The rand used to be a little bit about $1 to 4 rands, but now a dollar is about 20 something rands, if I'm not mistaken. So it's affecting businesses in Africa badly. Now the problem is the demand for African currencies is so low. The demand is so low. For example, if you want to sell oil in Nigeria to any country in the world, you have to sell it in US dollars. That means the dollar is constantly in high demand, but the naira is not in high demand. So the currencies in Africa are in low demand, so low. And in economics, the higher the demand, the higher the price. The lesser the demand, the lesser the price. So African economies need to come up with a singular currency. That's number one. Gaddafi talked about the
Okay.
Afro. Because of that, they killed him. Talked about the Afro, the currency backed with gold or backed with African resources. So that's one of the moves we have to make, we must make. And you talk about building a central bank for Africa in Abuja. Talk about the African Monetary Fund to be situated at Yaoundé in Cameroon. But he couldn't carry out the missions. They killed him. So we need to have a singular currency in Africa, number one. Number two, Africa must switch over from an import-oriented economy to an export-oriented economy. We have to begin to measure that also. Number three, we have to work on our resources. We don't have to be exporting raw materials out of Africa. Look at Ghana produces cocoa. Ivory Coast produces cocoa. Now, these two countries, they produce about 75% of the cocoa in the entire world. And the cocoa market is worth over 100 billion US dollars. But these two countries, they do not make up to $10 billion from all the $100 billion is being made from chocolate every year. Wow. They export the raw materials. How can you be exporting raw materials? Exporting raw materials is exporting wealth. So Africa must come together, at least have an economic unity, at least a single block economically, and begin to trade among ourselves. Intra-African trade will improve Africa's share of global trade by at least 2 to 3 to 4%. And that alone will take over 100 million Africans out of poverty, according to experts. So Africa must begin to form that economic bloc against all odds. It's not going to come cheaply. It's not going to come easily because our adversaries, they know the power of African unity more than we do. African unity is the solution, and they know better than us. So we have to find a way to build that unity. This African monetary unity union, we will have to form it. A single currency, single economic bloc.
Okay.
We must have it. Then we have to start exporting finished products. No country becomes great by exporting raw materials. China doesn't export cocoa to Africa. China doesn't export only rice. China produces cars. China produces electronics. They produce shipping materials. They produce materials for making ships. They produce all those things that we need. They produce mobile phones. Now they have TikTok. They have Alibaba that sells services across the world. Which one do we have in Africa? They have Facebook in US. What do we have in Africa? With Facebook, the US has something to sell to the world. With Twitter, they have something to sell to the world. What do we have to sell to the world to make them to demand African currencies? And that will not be enough. We must have a single African currency so that when we are selling goods and services to the world, we are selling it with African currency, not with dollar. Not you're selling cocoa to Japan, you're selling with US dollar. That means you want dollar to become a hard currency. Why not sell it with cedis? Why not sell it with Afro and the African currency? So these are things that are affecting the African economy. We're shooting ourselves at the foot and we're hurting ourselves. We have to work on industrialization in Africa. We have to industrialize Africa. We have to improve education in Africa. We have to build technical education in Africa. We have to improve vocational education in Africa. We have to produce more. I'm not talking about producing more. I'm not talking about producing rice, producing beans. That is not production. That is simply harnessing the resources in the land. That is not production. Production is turning rice to flour and exporting it to US. We're talking about producing garments in Africa, exporting it to China. We're talking about building cars in Africa, exporting it to Europe. That is what we need in Africa. If we don't have that, we are not talking about any development. The economy will keep crashing. The dollar will keep rising. Our own currencies will keep being low. Naira will keep falling, no matter what they like to do. What is Nigeria producing? I've been a Nigerian since I was born, and people are talking about breaking away from Nigeria. They don't want to be part of Nigeria any longer. And they want to have state of Biafra or Duduwa because of what is going on in the country. A country has been producing oil since 1956. We keep exporting crude oil to countries of the world. Now look at the oil companies we have in Nigeria. We have Shell BP, we have Chevron, we have Ajib. These are foreign companies, multiple companies. Who are the African multinational companies? That's why I'm building ACPP biogas, so we can have an African energy company, multinational company. With that, we can earn foreign exchange for Africa to develop Africa. So if we keep exporting raw materials, if we keep exporting rice, keep exporting crude oil, if we keep depending on one product, one resource or the other, we can't build an economy. We can't build an economy like that. So, for example, look at Democratic Republic of Congo. What over 22 meters in natural resources? What does Congo produce? What does Congo produce apart from exporting timber, exporting crude oil, exporting all those materials, exporting uranium and all those things? Now they're exporting them, and those countries are using to build what they need to build nuclear weapons, to build all those things to protect themselves. So we keep exporting all those things. The more we keep exporting them,
Thank you.
our currency in our economy. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ezra. Thank you. Mr. Hassan, one last word. What concluding remark do you have for this topic that you think Africans should take home, those the viewers and all those who are going to hear us after?
Yeah, I believe that this program is very important to talk about and the message. And I hope it will be a message that carries millions of thoughts from the African youth. And I think to promote African development, first comes from the young people who are going to live a better Africa, a prosperous Africa. So I am very happy to be part of such this program with organized platform. And thank you, Mr. Gabriel Yekaya, Mr. Professor. Thank you. And by the way, you are analyzing the politics of Africa, the political dynamics, economics, and something like that. Mr. Ize, I'm over again happy and very jubilated to be part of such this beautiful and well organized event. So I think the program is over. So greetings and see you later.
Thank you. The United States of Africa is thanking you for your contribution, Mr. Ezra, Mr. Ezra Chimere. Just 30 seconds. What do we have to take home today? Mr. Ezra, is your mic on?
All right, my mic is on. All right.
So what do we have to take home? Just 30 seconds. Yes, 30 seconds.
All right. Thank you so much. In this seminar, we need something like this to educate Africans. Thank you, Gabriel Yagaka. Thank you, Assad. Thank you, Daniel Mabono, for organizing this show. We need the education in Africa. Is the key to transform the mind of. So we need to transform the minds of the people of Africa. We need that education, which is the key to changing the world, according to our leader Nelson Mandela. We need that education to transform the minds of Africans. So we need something like this to keep happening all the time. So when we transform the mind, we can then transform the United States of Africa and solve this problem of leadership and have the kind of leadership and kind of democracy or the kind of leadership that we have in Africa, whether it's democracy or monarchy, constitutional monarchy, anyone that we have in Africa, we will come together as one people, leaders and people of Africa, to decide the best for us and will not allow the West to decide for us what we will have in Africa, and then we can reclaim the stolen mandates that they took from Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Eze.
Thank you
Thank
too.
you. Thanks to all the viewers. Thank you, Mr. Assad. Mr. Assad, I want to let the audience know that he is from Somaliland. He's an economist, a Pan-Africanist, and a youth activist. Mr. Eze Chimere is a Nigerian. He's a leader of the OAF and the CEO of ACCP Biogas. We thank the coordinator, Mr. Daniel Mwambuno, for putting this uh, for making this possible. And we also say if you have any contribution on this topic, you can always drop it as a comment on the pages or the platforms of the United States of Africa. Thank you. This was the 9th episode, and we are equally going to join you back on the 10th episode to talk about many more topics that is going to lead to Africa's emancipation and development. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you too for
Okay.
organizing this event. Thank you
Okay.
very much. You and Daniel and the audiences and the guests and on behalf of the guests, I say congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. See you next time. See you. See you.
See you. See
So
you. Bye bye.